Welcome to the Responsible Negotiation Podcast, produced by the DC Mediation and Dispute Resolution Institute. I am your host, Francis Ojok. Here at the Institute, we prevent, manage, resolve, and transform conflict into an opportunity for positive change using mediation and other appropriate dispute resolution mechanisms. Visit our website to learn more or contact us at info@dcmediationinstitute.com and let us know how we can work with you or collaborate with you. Without further ado, let's get to the show. This marks the last segment of our series event on this topic. Our speaker today is a living testimony of hope, forgiveness, and resilience. We are so honored to have Robbie to give us this closing remark. A little bit about Robbie. She is a spokesperson and director of international relations for Parent Circle, a group of over 600 Israeli and Palestinian families who have lost their loved one to the conflict. Together, they work to reconcile or toward a just solution to the conflict. Without wasting much time, Robbie, the platform is yours.
Lucy, thank you so much for inviting me. And I have to say that it's now 700 families. That doesn't please me because it can be only for one reason that you would join this organization. But there is a sense of hope when it's people who actually suffered loss on the 7th of October and after. So there are families, and we'll talk about it. And it's such a dark and sad and frightening and time where you question your belief system and you want to see if you really mean what you say. And you think about, for me personally, it's about understanding why, connecting to what happened with the man who killed my son. Was it something that I wanted to understand why? It doesn't mean that you condone, but it does mean that you have this sense of, if you can understand why, that might be the beginning of some kind of healing process. And so I asked all the time, why, how could this be possible that on the 7th of October, the Hamas came in and did the most barbaric acts? How can that happen? How can a person get to that point where that's how they believe? And I thought about a kid growing up in Gaza. He's like 12. Every 2 years, there's another war. Every 2 years, he sees his mother running with his siblings and they don't have a shelter. He has no hope. He's in a large prison. He can't escape. So there's no freedom of movement, which is a basic human right. So what kind of an adult comes out of something like that? It's not condoning, it's understanding why, and perhaps then beginning to think of a way to change that situation so that this adult will be a different kind of person. And then I look at the kids that grew up on the kibbutzim, which are surrounding Gaza, and I think to myself, okay, they thought they were invincible. They had shelter and it was quite accessible on the kibbutzim. So there were many, many rockets, and that in itself is frightening, but there was a sense of, I'll be okay. And then you look at the towns that surround Gaza, that is like Sderot, Ashkelon, Ashdod, towns where people for years, kids, have been experiencing rockets. I can tell you it's not funny. It's traumatic. Outside of my house, from the 7th of October, there were non-stop rockets. And the sound of the siren is traumatic. Even if I have a safe room, unlike the poor woman in Gaza who has nowhere to run, but there are also women in Sderot who have like 15 seconds to get to the shelter. And I heard this woman on the radio who said that she has 15 seconds, an Israeli woman, to get to the shelter, and she has 3 kids and one's in a wheelchair. So who should she take? All of these stories are the human consequence of conflict, which we don't look at. Everything becomes a number. You know, there are so many dead now. Who on earth will ever remember their names? It is heartbreaking. And then I think, well, you know, if I could understand that, if I could understand why, then maybe we can change the circumstance of that person. Maybe those people who live in the towns surrounding Gaza will then be able to form some kind of connection to the kids in Gaza. There is that in a very small way, but of course now everything is so uncertain, and it's this uncertainty that is so worrying. And the idea that the rest of the world is importing our conflict into their country and creating hatred between Jews and Muslims. I've been watching very carefully what's happening on the campuses all around America, and I find that terrifying. I can't imagine how some kid who happens to be Jewish, who's studying at Columbia University, what on earth has he got to do with the decisions of Netanyahu and his cabinet and his war cabinet? What purpose is there in that? Why not try to find a way to work together to actually force Israel and Palestine to come to the table? It's been such a strange time for me now. You know, since October, I've traveled to America twice, and I couldn't believe that something like the World Bank would ask me and a Palestinian partner to come and talk because the Jewish workers and the Muslim workers will not talk to each other. That is insane, importing our conflict. And who am I to come and tell them what to do? And so fortunately, because thousands of people have been turning to us for some kind of hope, for some kind of other story to come out from Israel and Palestine, I must have done more than 100 interviews since October with CNN, with Christian Amanpour, NBC, all Al Jazeera, all of these. And we were thinking, how can we actually handle all these people who are turning to us to come and do dialogue meetings? And so we had a meeting with Georgetown University, that is the parent circle, and the American Friends of the parent circle. Georgetown have been a kind of mentor for us for many, many years, and we really appreciate this relationship. And so we had, firstly, a vigil in their beautiful church that they have. And they had a rabbi and an imam and a priest, and I was there, and a Palestinian man from Jenin, who miraculously managed to get from Jenin to the Jordanian border, which people don't even have a vague idea of how brave that was for him to do that. And in this vigil, people were not allowed to bring posters or flags or any, except a candle. And we spoke, and I realized that how you can get people to be part of the solution and not the problem, because that's what's happening worldwide. All of these things are part of the problem. There's no solution, long-term solution, in screaming outside Columbia University. It might be better to try and get your congressman to force Israel and Palestine to sit down and talk, to get the hostages back, to stop all this madness. I have a cousin, a big family that live in London, and there's a little kid there of 13 who got on the train with her Star of David, which she wears inside her shirt, which probably already tells you something about what that life is like for them now. And it came out of her shirt in the train, and some guy came up to her and said, "Die, you bloody Jew." And they are removing the scrolls from the doors in London. London is a real hotbed of anti-Semitism now. That's very frightening. It has, you know, you can think about the 30s when you see things like that happening. So how do we handle all of this? What can we do? And so with Georgetown University, we are creating an online module, which is 3 dialogue meetings A dialogue meeting is a Palestinian and an Israeli who comes from the parent circle, who've suffered an immediate family loss. And we talk about the transformation from hatred, from wanting revenge, to understanding that there is no revenge, and that to understand that nonviolence and ending the occupation and reconciliation would be the only way for us to be safe in the long term. That's the dialogue meeting. We filmed 3 dialogue meetings. We have question and answer. Of course, we know mainly what people ask. And Georgetown, together with us, are creating a manual which can be used for the facilitator. So I'm very pleased that we're doing that. And actually already they want the same thing in Germany and in Italy and probably in England. So here we are, something to offer that's, that you can touch. So those are part of the things that we're doing. And there are things that bring hope. I think about Vivian Silver. She was my dear, dear friend. She used to drive children from Gaza to hospitals in Israel and back again. And she created Women Wage Peace. And she used to work with the Bedouin. And now, on the 7th of October, I thought she was taken hostage. And I thought to myself, wow, she'll come out and she'll be the first person to start a peace movement. But actually, she was burned to death in a cupboard. And the extraordinary thing is that her son has joined the parent circle and he's speaking out to end the war, to stop the violence, to stop the bloodshed. That's extraordinary. He was already doing this maybe 2 weeks after his mother was killed. And the same goes for the family, the Inon family, whose both parents were burned to death in kibbutz in the south on the 7th. And people from Gaza who have, well, really from the West Bank, who have family in Gaza, who have lost something like 30 family members in one bombing, are also talking for peace. And one of these is a member of our group, and he lost a whole family, except for one kid. And he said, I don't want to talk about the dead. I want to talk about my niece and how can we change her life so that this won't happen again. All of these things are the human consequence of what is happening. I looked at the kids in the parent circle. Every year we have a summer camp, and 50 Palestinian and Israeli bereaved kids come together. It's sometimes the first time they've ever met a Palestinian in their lives, and vice versa. And this year, the government, in its great wisdom, tried to stop us from having the summer camp. Fortunately, the American embassy and the German embassy intervened, and we had the summer camp. And my grandson was one of the kids that went to the summer camp. And has not exactly had a difficult life. This kid's pretty spoiled. But he said, this is the best week that I've ever spent. And I wanted to understand why. And I began to understand that it's alleviating the fear of the other. This is the first time that he sat together with Palestinian kids, that they sang karaoke together, that they cooked together, that they cried together when they told their personal story. What more could you actually expect? We were all so thrilled with the summer camp. And then after the summer camp, we went on the 21st of September, which is International Peace Day, to the UN in Jerusalem, where these kids signed a charter to say they didn't want any more violence, for nonviolence, reconciliation, and ending the occupation. And then 3 weeks later came the 7th of October. And you can imagine that kids aged 14 to 17 are not exactly very nuanced. And so they started to send terrible messages on social media to each other, and they were furious. And so we started to work with them uninationally. The Palestinian facilitator from the summer camp with the Palestinian kids, and the Israeli facilitator with the Israeli kids. And it was so extraordinary because it took something like a month and a half, 6 to 7 weeks. And they said, okay, they're willing to meet on Zoom. And of course, a lot of anger came out and a lot of stories, and each kid, the Palestinians were watching their media, the Israelis their media. That's like a parallel universe. And they found themselves not believing what the other said. And it took time. And now they said they want to meet. But there's a closure on the West Bank, so they can't meet. So we thought, what can we do? Because this is the future of our organization. These children need healing. And they said, yes, they're now willing to meet. But how? So we took a trip to Cyprus, and the kids are going to go to the summer camp in Cyprus. And it's quite extraordinary. We found a beautiful place in the mountains, which I think will be healing for them. We have to have this situation where they can find each other again and can heal. It's very difficult now. I think there's an element of miracle that we are still working together. We are planning a ceremony on the 12th of May. It's the day of actually Memorial Day for Israeli soldiers, but the Parent Circle and an organization called Combatants for Peace have an alternate ceremony. It's a joint ceremony. Because there's so much grief and so much pain going on and so much anger, we can't have it. We normally have it on an outdoor venue. And last year, 15,000 people came and 300,000 people listened on and watched online. But this year we can only have it online. And we have dedicated most of the ceremony to children, children in war. What have children in war got to do with this madness? What is the only thing you can blame them is for being Palestinian or Israeli. That's all. And so we have kids from the summer camp, Israelis writing to children in Gaza. And we have a small clip of kids from about 8 to 14 talking about their dreams. All of this, and then the son of Vivian Silva, this man who lost his mother on the 7th of October, will speak, and music. And it would be something that we would be very happy if you could promote this event, because people can tune in live. I will send you afterwards a notification so that you can put that out, because I think it's terribly important that people in the world can understand that not everybody in Israel is waiting to kill a Palestinian neighbor and vice versa. One Palestinian killed my son, not the whole Palestinian nation. I have to talk about the West Bank. It's very important because Gaza is that, on Broadway now. Everybody's talking about Gaza. Nobody seems to think that anything matters in Sudan, where 18 million people are on the brink of starvation and 8 million people out of their houses. Why is that not as important? I keep asking this question. Why is Ukraine now not part of this terrible news that is going on everywhere? I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. But all I can say is stop importing our conflict. Stop doing that, because you're not helping anybody. You just feel good about yourself. So you'll camp out on the campus of Columbia University. And how exactly will that help the Palestinian people? Why not try to think of a way to work with the Jewish students on campus to make a difference? To try to get people in Israel and Palestine to talk, to try to get the negotiations going, to get the hostages back. It's so difficult to run around the world and keep on talking and keep on saying, stop doing this, because you're not helping anybody.
Are you ready to become the change you want to see in your community or in your workplace? If so, check out our tailored workshops and mediation skills, training, and certifications designed to equip you with the practical skills to become an effective conflict resolver and a certified mediation practitioner. Now, let's get back to the show.
I want to tell you about the West Bank. Because we're not taking any notice of the West Bank, terrible things are happening there. The settlers are running rampant. They are doing exactly what they want. They are violent, and there's no accountability. Nobody's talking about that. More than 400 people have been killed, Palestinians, in the West Bank. There's no freedom of movement. The people in the West Bank who were working, the men who worked in Israel, are not able to come to work. And so since the 7th of October, there's been, of course, the economic situation is dire. And so what happens is that there's domestic violence, which is happening. And it's the same thing for the people who are displaced in Israel. People are not in the north. There's like 80,000 people also displaced since the 7th of October in the north on the Lebanese border. So there's domestic violence there too. All of these things have consequences that we don't look at. We don't know. The night before I came to America, I actually had a Zoom with the women, the Palestinian women in our group. And I asked them, please tell me what your daily life is like, because I promise you that I will tell everybody that I meet in every talk, just tell me what it's like for you to live on a daily basis. And here comes this answer of their children being stuck at home, maybe school twice a week, of their husbands stuck at home, of the violence that's going on with the settlers. And yet they said at the end of the conversation, we want to stay with the parent circle. And I can tell you that out of the 700 families, only 3 families have left since the beginning of the war. I see that somewhat of a miracle. I see the fact that we are working together as a staff. We are 20 on the staff, 10 Palestinians, 10 Israelis, and nobody can do anything without the other. We have 2 of everything. It's a bit like Noah's Ark, actually. We have 2 directors, 2 people dealing with education, 2 people that deal with projects. Everything is Palestinian, Israeli. Nobody can make a decision without the other. We have a joint board where every year it rotates. 1 year the Palestinians are the chairman, 1 year the Israelis. And that's our kind of gesture of trying to find some form of not being patronizing. It's not so easy when this is not an equal situation. When we talk about reconciliation, we have to tell the truth. And that's very difficult sometimes. It doesn't mean that I don't love Israel and that I am now a Palestinian. I do love this country, but I want to live in a moral place. I want my neighbor to be free. I want the women in Gaza to be safe and their children too. And so how do we get to all of this? I mean, what is the long-term goal of this organization? It's to create a framework for a reconciliation process to be an integral part of any political future peace agreement. Without that, all we can have at best is a ceasefire. That's what we've had up to now. We've signed all kinds of stuff on the White House lawn, but people have never actually been involved in any of those decisions. And they don't even understand what reconciliation means. So most of the work that we do on the ground during the war, this has become very difficult. But I can tell you about a project which can actually be adapted all over the world. It's a parallel narrative project. Mostly what happens in the parent circle is the work that we do is through storytelling. I haven't even told you my personal story. I'm so involved with the war now that I seem to have ignored that. But I will tell you very shortly that when the army came to tell me that David, my son, had been killed by a Palestinian sniper, one of the first things that I said is, you can't kill anybody in the name of my child. And that was really prophetic about what I was going to be doing with the rest of my life. I knew almost immediately that I wanted to do something to prevent other families, mainly mothers, from experiencing this pain, because there isn't anything worse. And so I was looking for an organization or some way or some framework to do this work. And the Parent Circle actually found me and invited me to a weekend in East Jerusalem. And I went and we sat around the table, Palestinian and Israeli bereaved parents and families. And I looked into the eyes of the Palestinian mothers, and I suddenly realized that we shared the same pain. And that if we also, when we went to a grave to cry, the tears were the same color. And that if we could stand on the stage and talk in the same voice for reconciliation, then surely that would be an example to other people. And that's actually was the beginning of traveling all over the world and spreading this message, because this message is not only local, it's an international message. And when one night I came home and I sat next to my computer and there was a knock on my door and there were 3 soldiers outside my door, and I thought to myself, I can't open the door. I cannot face another death, another child dying. And they knocked and knocked and knocked, and it turned out that they came to tell me that they caught the man who killed David, thinking that I would be delighted. But of course, what happened was that was a whole questioning of anything that I do. Because if I'm not willing, I mean, would it be in integrity to continue this work if I wasn't willing to walk the talk? It took me several months. And I sat down and wrote a letter to the parents of Thaya. That's the name of the man who killed David. I told them about the parents' circle, and I told them about David. He was a student at Tel Aviv University, and he was studying for his master's in the philosophy of education. And he was part of the peace movement, and he didn't want to serve in the occupied territories. And here it happened that he was called up, and here's the dilemma of a young man who's been brought up in this country with the idea that he has to defend. And so he came to see me and he said, I don't know what to do. If I don't go, what will happen to my students? He was teaching philosophy to kids who were going to be inducted into the army. And if I don't go, what will happen to my soldiers? He was the officer. And if I do go, I will treat people with dignity, and so will all my soldiers. So you see, here's this dilemma. And I said, don't go, but he went, And he was killed by a Palestinian sniper along with 9 other people. In the letter to the parents, or his parents, I also said we need to meet. We owe that to our children and grandchildren. They said to the Palestinians who delivered the letter, if everybody would sign on this letter, maybe there could be peace. In any event, I'm not a very patient character. It took something like 3 years. And I got a letter back from the sniper in which he said I was crazy and that I should stay away from his family and that he killed 10 people to free Palestine. But I actually knew that when he was a small child, here we come back to the reason. Remember, right in the beginning, we were talking about why do things happen? So when he was a small child, he saw his uncle violently killed by the Israeli army, and he lost 2 further uncles in the second uprising. And so he was out on the path of revenge, in my opinion. And so this was a kind of freeing up for me because I understood that I was now no longer a victim. I gave that up and I was completely free. My life was no longer contingent on this man saying, I'm sorry, I'm not sorry, or whatever. And so we went and we made a film in South Africa about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We wanted to learn lessons from them. We met extraordinary people. And for me, it was a personal kind of looking at what's the meaning of forgiving. What do you mean when you say you forgive? And if we were sitting in a room and not on this Zoom and gloom, I would then ask you, what do you mean when you say you forgive? I do this almost in every meeting that we have. And so I met a South African woman who actually lost her daughter, was killed by UPLA, the military wing, black. And she came to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and said to the people who killed her daughter, I forgive you. And I wanted to know what she meant. And I went to meet her and she said, forgiving is giving up your just right to revenge. And then I met the man who actually sent the people who killed her daughter. And he said, by her forgiving me, she released me from the prison of my inhumanity. I thought that was an extraordinary statement. So I came back to Israel and I thought it's now time to meet with the man who killed David. And then I discovered that after many years of trying to do this, that the law says that he has to actually ask to meet me. I can't initiate this. And it was quite extraordinary because there's a man called Mark Ombright. I don't know if you know him. He actually wanted to be the mediator, but I didn't want him to be the mediator. I liked him very much, but I wanted it to be a Palestinian who spoke the same language, who understood the culture. It's not that important for me anymore. I would like to meet this man in the long run if it's possible, but my life is not contingent on that. And I'm not a survivor, I'm a victor. I'm certainly not a victim.
Are you ready to become the change you want to see in your community or in your workplace? If so, check out our tailored workshops and mediation skills, training, and certification designed to equip you with the practical skills to become an effective conflict resolver and a certified mediation practitioner. Now, let's get back to the show. One of the things that I heard from your statement is on fear, grief, and revenge. Oftentimes, when something tragic happens to us, we get stuck in that circle of what is going to happen again, or what can I do to get my pay back. It would be helpful to hear how, for you, you are able to move past that stage.
No, I don't really know. There's no universal panacea to this kind of thing. It's a very individual. Some people take something like 20 years to be able to come to this organization. I knew almost immediately. I wasn't looking for revenge, and also there was no face. So who was I going to take revenge on? And I mean, there is no revenge. Probably if there was revenge that would bring David back, I would do anything. I promise you, I wouldn't have any morals anymore if I knew that I could spend another hour with David. But that's not possible. And it's a choice that you make. Many parents die together with their children, not physically, but they become completely inactive. Others build monuments, others do all kinds of things, create scholarships, do all kinds of things. Each person has to find the way to get out of bed in the morning. For me, it was education of peace. And that was for me commemorating David because that's who he was. He was all about education. And so I found this way, in a way, to deal with, you can't ever deal with grief. All you can do is learn to live with it next to you. It's very painful. You don't forget, and you just learn how to live with it next to you. But there isn't a way that I can tell anybody, and I don't think I have the right to give anybody advice. I can just tell them that what worked for me. And what worked for me was to do something. And actually, my behavior since the 7th of October is very similar to my behavior when David was killed. I had to do something to change the world overnight. And so I just went into full action, like all this traveling and all these interviews and never stopping for a minute. That was probably the way that I can deal with it. Even now, if you look at my diary, you won't believe that an old bag like me can actually do all of these things every day. But it's a driving force within that makes you know that you have to. I can't think about my grandchildren in the future if I'm not willing to do whatever I can to protect them.
Kindly accept my genuine heartfelt condolences for the death of your son and my expression of my genuine distress at the horrendous waste of humanity that this conflict has seen. For me, quite frankly, one life lost is one life too many. And that's kind of neat. I suppose it gets me away from this sordid body count comparison that happens in the media. They killed that many and they killed that many. One is one too many. One is an infinite. If you think of the sanctity of human life, then it's infinity. It's just too much for too long. I would like, if I may, to draw upon three things that stand out in your presentation, amongst much more. You mentioned about the idea of killing in the name of, in that case, you mentioned in the name of yourself. How do we prevent killing in the name of anything or anyone, let alone the name of your son? I would suggest, with respect, that the aggravation of anti-Semitism is because killing by the Israeli armed forces is seen to be done, sadly, in the name of Jewry, because what makes things worse is the fact that any criticism of the state of Israel is often accused as being anti-Semitism. And in some ways, by doing that, it means the Israeli state claims to be acting in the name of Jews. So how do we separate those two so that one group cannot be tarred with the actions of another group associated with it?
I think about the Israeli average man in the army.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody serves in the army. If you don't, it's very rare that you don't.
I'm aware of this.
So
Yeah.
I can think on the 7th of October, there was a deep humiliation of men who were in the army because they lost the war for the first time. They could not protect the citizens. So what kind of shit is going through their hearts of how they couldn't, this big army with this whole reputation for being so wonderful and protecting everybody. And so from the beginning of the State of Israel, nothing like this ever happened. We had the war of the Day of Atonement, the Yom Kippur War, which was different. This was so personal and so intertwined with the lives of everybody. Everybody knows somebody who was affected by the 7th of October. And of course, the hostage situation, which makes the army feel even more useless because they can't save the hostages. And when people are humiliated, they take revenge. Unfortunately, this is what happened, I think. I think there was a huge amount of anger, humiliation, and revenge. And so it's nothing to do with Jews. It's to do with Israelis and how they behave. So I don't have any problem, Slicha, I don't have any problem with you criticizing Israel, but I sure as hell would have a problem with you associating it with some poor kid who's studying in Washington. That's all.
No, I didn't say that I made that assertion. I certainly do not. What I'm saying is because of the accusation that is widespread in the media, that criticism of the state of Israel is automatically termed anti-Semitism, logically, but incorrectly and improperly, creates the impression by those who don't care to look any further beyond the surface of some way the action of the state of Israel being done in the name of Jews. And that is unhelpful for Jews or people in any way who are otherwise associated with the state of Israel. And on that, I think we completely agree.
This whole movement of, sorry to interrupt you, but there's a whole movement of not in my name and blah, blah, blah.
Indeed.
Yes, I can identify with that.
Indeed.
But I don't like the importation. I don't like the importation of this because it has a very negative result. I've been talking about this from I was invited to the House of Lords in London, and they gave me a page like this, and with a line drawn down the middle, and on the right-hand side, the pro-Israeli Lords, and on the left-hand side, the pro-Palestinian Lords, and with pictures, just in case I couldn't work it out. And so I said to them, look, I don't know what you think you're doing. You're pro-Israel. You think 3.5 million Palestinians will disappear in a puff of smoke, and you're pro-Palestinian. You think another 6-7 million Jews will just be gone because that's what you want. So if you can't be part of the solution, then please leave us alone. You're not helping anybody. You're just taking our conflict into your country and creating hatred between Jews and Muslims. And that's what's happening. And that's
You're absolutely right. And it begs the question then, where's the third column, the most important column? So who are the pro-humanity laws? And that's really at the core of this issue.
Well, I think people, unless they actually experience living here, have no idea how painful this all is, how ashamed I feel in many ways, because I'm part of the system. It's like I came from South Africa, and so I was in the anti-apartheid movement, so what? But every white person benefited from the apartheid system. And I live in Jaffa in a very nice, lovely apartment. And yes, there were rockets outside my house, blah, blah. And yes, I feel trauma. And yes, I jump when there's noise. But can you imagine what these two nations are going to go through now? It's just, I wish it would stop.
Well, it will. It will. And in fact,
how many people will have to die before it does?
You mentioned about people being on the path of revenge. And the current phase of armed combat is creating more people sworn to the path of revenge, I would suggest.
Of course.
So, how do you hope the initiatives, actions of the parent circle could somehow disrupt or prevent the process that's putting more people onto the path of revenge? It sounds very much to me like your initiative, which is truly wonderful. It sounds to me like it is really dealing with people who have been put onto the path of revenge rather than, and I don't see how you could. It's not a criticism. I'm just sharing with you my puzzlement. I don't see how you might be able to deal with the machine that is creating all this misery and loss and waste of humanity, which, if it doesn't kill it, puts more people on the path of revenge. How can we deal with the source problem as well as dealing with the symptoms?
I think that much of it is the judicial system, preserving this judicial system. I can tell you that last week we were in court because the Minister of Education, in his great wisdom, threw us out of schools after we've been working for 18 years with 17-year-old kids. It's the first time they ever met a Palestinian in their lives, and telling their personal story in a very vulnerable classroom and having kids. Now, the first thing I ask a 17-year-old kid in a classroom, who of you have ever met a Palestinian? Turns out nobody. Who speaks Arabic? One in the whole class, because Granny came from Iraq or something. And who's been overseas? 90% of the class. So there's no connection. It's the first time they ever met a Palestinian in his humanity. It's so extraordinary to even think that. And going into, we do a lot of work when it's not wartime in the West Bank. Personally, we go into houses because the schools don't allow us. Actually, the first person who said we could go into schools was Yasser Arafat. But then, of course, after that, there were elections and the education ministry didn't allow us to go into schools in Palestine. But going into a Palestinian home and seeing first how they look at me, you know, who's this woman? Not only me, other women from the parents' circle.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then I recognize that they've never heard a personal story from a Palestinian point of view of an Israeli mother. And who've they ever met? Soldiers and settlers. Why would they think I'm any different? So the only way that we can break this is by breaking this stigma, you know, and by going to court. We actually went to court because they threw, the Ministry of Education threw us out of schools. And the court said last week they threw the Ministry of Education out and said they have to put us back in schools. Whether it's going to happen or not, I think the minister's going to probably take it to the High Court. But whatever it is, it's a permanent fight. You know, we're just 700 families who are doing whatever they can to make a difference. But and until this government is history, we're going to have to face some very ugly times. We have some terrible people who are running the country now. And I don't want to talk politics. They're much more brilliant people than me who can do that. All I can tell you is this is the worst government we've ever had. I have never, in all my days in Israel since 1967, experienced such a period where I couldn't believe that this caliber of people are looking after my future. And so hopefully this is not going to last. There have been so many demonstrations all the time that can give you hope.
Ironically, the extreme nature of current events, at least in my humble opinion, is a main source for hope. It has become so extreme that people cannot stomach it from either side.
Exactly so.
Yeah.
You have talked against importation of, the conflict to other countries around the world. But as a global citizen or as people of the world, though being very far away from the Middle East, how can we support the peace process in the Middle East?
I think you have to be more informed. You know, since the beginning of this war, the whole world have become experts on the Middle East. It's extraordinary what they say. You know, I just, when I'm traveling and I listen to this stuff, the sea to the river to the sea, they don't know what river, they don't know what sea. I don't think they could find Israel on a map. And so become more informed and try to force your government to force us to the table. We have to get there. One way or another, we have to get there, because this can't go on. We can't go on killing each other. And there are miracles that happen. If you consider the fact that there is a German ambassador in Israel today and an Israeli ambassador in Germany, then anything can happen. Think about that. And I can't give up. If you would have told me when I first came here that blacks and whites would sit in the room after Mandela came out of jail and not kill each other, I would have said you were mad. Now, South Africa is no great paradise at the moment. However, there would have been a terrible bloodshed if there hadn't have been the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That's for sure. So I can't give up hope.
When you are reflecting, say, 10 years from now, 5 years from
Well,
now.
I'm not going to be around 10 years from now, Habibi.
If,
I've had enough.
but, but what do you see as the future?
Well, it looks like a two-state solution. The thing is, I don't really care what the solution is as long as both sides agree on it. And, you know, it can be a one-state solution, two-state solution, 10-state solutions, United States solution. I don't care. As long as both sides will sit at the table and not one side forcing the other side into a so-called solution. That's how I can see peace here. But we also have to have some form of a reconciliation process.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying it has to be South Africa. I'm not saying that. It's a different relation. It's a different religion. It's different. But I can see groups like, I don't know if you know, there's a group called Breaking the Silence. Breaking the Silence are soldiers who come out of their military service and say what they did in the army. And for me, that's the future evidence in a reconciliation process together with the prisoners. You know, I said, now, please release the man who killed my son if that will bring back a hostage. What is more important than that? It's the valuing this humanity, the sanctity of human life that we seem to have forgotten all about.
Thank you so very much for sharing that. Thank you for joining us today. As we approach the end of our session, I would love for you to, give us what would be your last word to the people watching and to those who were able to join us on Zoom here.
Wow, I don't know what to say to people. I think everybody has to make up their mind what they want to contribute and that everybody has value. You don't have to be somebody, you don't have to be Mandela. You can be yourself and still make a difference. And it doesn't have to be in the world. It can also be in your community. It can be if you love animals. It can be anywhere, but don't sit at home and wait for other people to do it for you.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can support us by leaving a 5-star review. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast to stay informed whenever we upload a new episode. See you in the next episode.